You ever wonder what happens when a man spends years alone not by circumstance, but by choice? No girlfriend. No daily validation. No warm body beside him when the nights get long. Just silence, repetition, the grind. From the outside, it looks like isolation. But let me tell you something, what you're looking at is potential energy. Stored power, a forge in the dark, where something is being built that the world isn't ready for. You see, when a man removes distraction, when he deliberately strips away dopamine traps, emotional dependencies, and the soft cushions of comfort, he's not giving up on life. He's choosing to craft one, and that's not romantic, that's neurological, that's physiological. We know from the neuroscience that solitude, real solitude, not loneliness, triggers deep internal recalibration. It creates space for the prefrontal cortex to strengthen. It sharpens focus. It amplifies dopamine efficiency. You become more satisfied with less, but more hungry for meaning. You start controlling your neurochemistry instead of letting your environment dictate it. Most people chase stimulation. They chase connection out of fear, not intention. But a man who sits with himself, who watches his thoughts, who lets the silence get loud, he learns to differentiate between impulse and purpose. He becomes immune to short-term rewards because he's training for something bigger. There is immense power in a man who delays gratification, not because he can't have what he wants, but because he knows what he wants is rare, and it's going to take everything he's got to get there. This man doesn't scroll endlessly. He studies, he lifts, he builds, he journals, he meditates. His room is a lab, not a lounge. He's studying himself, learning how to regulate his emotions, how to control his breath under stress, how to use discomfort as a lever, not a punishment. And yes, people around him won't get it. They'll call him cold, arrogant, maybe even broken. But that's because they've never seen what it looks like when someone commits fully to becoming the architect of their own mind. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes the cavalry isn't coming. No one's going to rescue him from his doubts, his pain, his fears. That moment, that's not a crisis, that's initiation. That's the beginning of the man who doesn't need a girlfriend to feel whole, because he's already doing the work to become whole alone. And paradoxically, that is the man who will attract something real, not from lack, not from need, but from alignment. So if you're in that season alone, misunderstood, doubting whether it's worth it, stay there. Don't flinch. Don't numb it, feel it, because while most are chasing comfort, you're cultivating capacity. While most are distracted, you're developing discipline. And while most are looking for someone to complete them, you're becoming someone who doesn't need completing. You have to understand solitude, when chosen, is one of the most powerful environmental interventions you can create for yourself. We're not talking about social rejection. We're not talking about being cast aside. We're talking about a deliberate, structured withdrawal from the noise, to recalibrate the nervous system, to reclaim your cognitive bandwidth, and to eliminate the unnecessary. Most people assume being alone means something's missing, but in reality, it often means something significant is under construction. In neuroscience, we know the brain craves prediction and routine. It constantly scans for feedback, social cues, emotional reinforcement, connection. And when you're in a relationship, especially one you're not consciously choosing or growing in, that feedback loop can become distorted. You start performing, you start adjusting your identity, your goals, even your time, to maintain harmony. But when a man chooses to step away from that loop, not out of bitterness, but from clarity, he removes all the false signals. He gives his prefrontal cortex full access to clean data. Who am I when no one is watching? What do I care about when there is no one to impress? That's the raw stuff of identity. That's where the real neuroplasticity happens. So the man who lives alone without a girl, friend by choice, he's not running from connection. He's refining his instrument. He's becoming harder to distract, harder to manipulate, harder to break. He's building a nervous system that's less reactive and more sovereign. And in that space, in that silence, he's not lonely. He's locked in. There's something almost primal that happens when you remove all the noise, when the messages stop. When no one checks in, when the only voice left is yours, most people panic in that space. They reach for a screen, a conversation, a distraction, anything to avoid being alone with their own mind. But the man who leans into it, who stays in it, begins to experience a different kind of stimulus. Silence becomes signal. And that's where power builds. In neuroscience, we talk about neuroadaptation, how the brain changes in response to its environment. When you're constantly stimulated, constantly connected, your dopamine system becomes desensitized. You need more to feel less, but when you're alone, when there's no artificial spike, your baseline begins to reset. Your receptors regain sensitivity. Suddenly, the small wins feel massive. The discipline becomes satisfying. The gym session, the cold shower, the early morning, each one triggers a natural reward circuit. That's not by accident. That's biological recalibration, and something else happens. Your time perception shifts, minutes stretch. Hours become more deliberate. You start noticing things, the tone of your inner dialogue, the rhythm of your breathing, the exact moment focus breaks, and how to bring it back. That kind of awareness doesn't happen when your life is filled with back dopamine hits. It happens in stillness, in boredom, in the moments no one wants to sit through. So when people ask, how do I get more disciplined? How do I build focus? This is it. You remove the noise, you sit in the silence, and you let the discomfort do its job. Because what looks like nothing from the outside is, in fact, the creation of something the world won't see until it's fully formed, unshakable internal control. What most people don't realize is that isolation, intentional, structured isolation, has profound effects on the brain. We're not just talking about mood or motivation. We're talking about real, measurable changes in brain function and structure. When a man lives alone without a girlfriend, without the emotional stimulation of romantic dynamics, he's creating a unique neurochemical environment, one that promotes deep self-regulation and higher-order thinking. The prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, decision-making, long-term planning, doesn't thrive in overstimulated conditions. It thrives in clarity, in controlled input, in environments where distractions are minimized. Solitude, especially when combined with purpose and discipline, allows the prefrontal circuits to gain precision. It reduces the noise in the limbic system, where emotional reactivity lives, and enhances top-down control. This means fewer impulsive actions, more intentional behavior. That's not just psychological growth. That's cortical dominance. That's brain training, and dopamine, one of the most misunderstood molecules in modern conversation, becomes more effective. When you're not constantly hijacking your system with novelty, dopamine begins to work for you instead of against you. The spikes flatten, the baseline rises, and suddenly you're motivated by effort, not just reward. The process itself becomes satisfying. You don't need a hit of validation or affection to feel alive. You're literally rewiring your brain to crave challenge, to enjoy solitude, to find meaning in your own rhythm. This is what makes the alone man dangerous in the best way. His emotional responses are less reactive. His goals are more internally anchored. His mind is optimized not for compliance or chaos, but for clarity and control. And that rewiring, that doesn't happen in the crowd. It happens in the quiet, alone, when no one's watching. There's a fundamental truth about human behavior that most people avoid because it's uncomfortable. The ability to delay gratification is one of the strongest predictors of long-term success, not just psychologically, but biologically. When a man chooses to live without the constant dopamine spikes of romantic attention or physical intimacy, what he's really doing is strengthening one of the most powerful systems in the human brain, the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. And the way you build that system is by not giving it what it wants right now. In neuroscience, we call this reward prediction error, the idea that when you expect a reward and don't get it, your brain adapts. It starts building deeper, more resilient motivation systems. The more you delay, the stronger that system becomes. It's like training a muscle. Every time you don't take the easy path, every time you sit with the discomfort of absence rather than chasing quick satisfaction, you're increasing your capacity to act based on vision, not craving. This is exactly what separates men who are reactive from those who are strategic. A reactive man moves toward whatever feels good right now. A strategic man can sit in the tension. He can stare down the urge to distract himself, to seek temporary connection, to numb the emptiness, and instead he channels that energy into building, into creating, into becoming. That ability to delay, whether it's in relationships, in career, in physical transformation. It rewires the brain to seek progress over pleasure, long-term growth over short-term comfort. And eventually, the things that once tempted you, they lose their grip. Because your system is no longer wired for low-effort highs, it's calibrated for purpose, for momentum. And that kind of man, the one who's trained himself not to need instant gratification, becomes unstoppable, not because he has more willpower, but because his brain has been rebuilt for the long game. The moment a man stops relying on external emotional input to feel stable, something radical happens. His entire system begins to shift from dependency to sovereignty. We know from both psychology and neuroscience that the human brain is wired for connection, yes, but it's also wired for adaptation. And when you remove the emotional feedback loop of a romantic relationship, when there's no one there to validate you, soothe you, or regulate your mood for you, you're forced to do something most people never even attempt. You learn to regulate yourself, and this isn't just a mindset shift. This is neurochemical. Emotional dependence is reinforced by co-regulation, the cycle where someone else's presence helps balance your stress hormones, particularly cortisol and oxytocin. It feels good, it's natural, but it can also become a crutch. When that's removed, the stress systems don't vanish, they spike. Your nervous system becomes exposed, raw, you feel everything more intensely. That's the point where most people cave. They reach back out, they reconnect, they compromise because they think discomfort means something's wrong. But here's the truth. Discomfort is the signal that your system is adapting, that your amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and emotional reactivity, is being challenged. And when you don't run from that challenge, when you stay in the fire long enough, your brain begins to build new regulation strategies. You start relying on breath work, on structure, on cold exposure, on movement, on deliberate focus. You begin to generate your own stability, your own peace, your own intensity without anyone else needing to be there to provide it. That's real power. Not pretending you don't need anyone, but knowing that you don't collapse when they're not there. You become less reactive, less needy, more intentional. And from that place, the decisions you make about who you bring into your life aren't made from lack. They're made from alignment. You're no longer searching for someone to save you from the weight. You've already learned how to carry it. When a man lives alone and isn't consumed by romantic distractions, his space stops being just a place to exist. It becomes a controlled environment, a lab. Every variable is under his command: light, temperature, noise, routine. That's not just a lifestyle upgrade, it's a neurobiological strategy. Because the human brain thrives in predictability when pursuing growth. The more control you have over your sensory environment, the more efficiently your brain and body can optimize for performance. Take this seriously. Your space either reinforces your goals or erodes them. When there's no partner pulling your attention, no unpredictable emotional waves, you can begin to engineer your environment with intention. You decide what your mornings look like, what light hits your eyes, what stimulus hits your ears, what thoughts enter your mind. That level of control over the external world creates a feedback loop that sharpens internal control. The nervous system becomes less chaotic, cortisol patterns stabilize, sleep architecture improves. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, accelerates because your system isn't in survival mode. It's in creation mode. Every corner of that room becomes part of a protocol. The desk isn't cluttered with distraction. It's organized for deep work. Kitchen isn't filled with impulsive snacks. It's prepped for fuel. The bed isn't a crash zone. It's a recovery chamber. You're no longer navigating around someone else's rhythms. You're building your own, grounded in science and discipline. And this creates compound returns, because the systems you build in solitude don't just support your present, they shape your identity. This isn't about obsession or hyper-control. It's about designing an ecosystem that removes friction and amplifies momentum. When your environment reflects your values, you no longer have to battle willpower every day. You wake up inside your purpose. And that alignment between your space, your behavior, and your goals turns your home into more than just shelter. It becomes a crucible for transformation. Something remarkable happens when a man stops needing validation. His brain chemistry begins to stabilize in a way that most people never experience. The modern world is built to hijack the dopamine system, constantly pinging you with likes, messages, compliments, subtle cues that say you matter, because we're watching. But the truth is, when your sense of worth is hooked to external signals, your internal systems become unstable. You're basically outsourcing your emotional regulation to variables you can't control, and that makes you fragile. But when a man lives alone, without the constant stream of romantic affirmation or relational drama, those feedback loops go quiet. And at first, it feels like withdrawal, because it is. Your dopamine system has to adapt. You're no longer getting intermittent rewards from texts, physical touch, or emotional highs. Your brain starts to recalibrate its reward system, not by shutting down, but by becoming more selective. It begins to register effort as rewarding. You stop chasing peaks and start finding depth in the process. You get more from doing the work than from being seen doing it. This is neurochemical sovereignty. When the nucleus accumbens, the brain's reward hub, isn't constantly flooded by external stimulus, it starts to rewire itself around internal goals. You no longer need someone to tell you you're on the right track. You feel it through structure, through repetition. Through delayed reward systems that actually strengthen neural pathways rather than fragment them. And here's where it becomes incredibly powerful. When you're no longer performing for anyone, your authenticity spikes. Your energy shifts from trying to be chosen to choosing yourself. You're not louder, but you're more certain. You're not more visible, but you're more grounded, and people can feel that. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's the presence of someone who's not asking for permission to be who they are. Because that man doesn't just look confident, his brain has been chemically conditioned to be confident, without the need for applause. People will misunderstand this path. They'll see the man who's alone, focused, detached from the usual emotional noise, and they'll label him cold, distant, emotionally unavailable. But what they're really witnessing is a nervous system that no longer plays by the same rules. Because when you remove yourself from the constant emotional stimulation of romantic entanglement, you're no longer signaling in the ways people are used to. You're not reactive, you're not broadcasting need, you're not leaking energy, and to the average observer, especially one still dependent on external validation, that looks like something's wrong. But in reality, it's a sign that something powerful is happening internally. The science is clear. When a person regulates their own emotional states consistently without external help, the amygdala becomes less hyperactive. The prefrontal cortex gains dominance. That means you're less driven by fear, insecurity, or people-pleasing, and more governed by rational, long-term thinking. You're not avoiding emotion, you're integrating it. You're not running from connection, you're refining your standards for it. But because you're no longer playing the social game for approval, you become hard to read. And what people can't read, they often judge. But that judgment is a reflection of their discomfort, not yours. Most people find security in emotional patterns, even if those patterns are dysfunctional, because at least they're predictable. When you stop engaging in that codependent dance, it disrupts their model of how relationships should work. And disruption, by definition, is uncomfortable, but that discomfort is also proof that you're operating at a different level of neurological and emotional processing. You're not better. You're just calibrated for clarity, not chaos, and the more grounded you become, the more obvious the gap is between stimulation and peace. You walk into a room and people feel it, not because you're projecting dominance, but because you're radiating stillness. You're not posturing, you're not trying. You've just done the work to no longer need to be understood. And ironically, that's what makes you magnetic, not to everyone, but to the few who recognize that depth doesn't always look like drama. Sometimes it looks like discipline. There is a crucial distinction to make about solitude. It's not a detour or a delay. It's a rite of passage. Neuroscience shows that any deep transformation requires periods of disruption, of challenge, of removing external scaffolding so the brain can rewire itself from the inside out. The man who chooses to live alone without a girlfriend isn't stuck or lost. He's initiating himself into a higher level of function. This initiation process activates stress systems, yes, but not the kind that break you down, the kind that build resilience. The sympathetic nervous system gets engaged, firing you up to meet discomfort head on, while the parasympathetic system teaches you how to recover from that stress efficiently. This push-pull creates neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, which governs self, control, focus, and long-term planning. It's a biological necessity to have this phase. Without it, your brain never fully builds the circuits needed for autonomy and deep self-regulation. This is why many men rush into relationships or distractions. They're avoiding the necessary reorganization that solitude demands. But that avoidance is costly. It means repeated patterns of emotional reactivity, external dependence, and fragmented identity. So that season of being alone, no matter how uncomfortable, is not a failure. It's the transformation furnace, the internal recalibration where identity is forged anew. This process demands patience and presence because the brain hates unpredictability and wants certainty, but growth requires uncertainty. And here's the paradox: the more you resist this initiation, the longer it takes. The more you lean into it, the quicker you emerge not just whole, but amplified. You come out not just ready for connection, but ready for connection on your terms, because transformation is never about avoiding solitude. It's about learning to thrive within it. The final piece, and perhaps the most profound, is understanding how wholeness functions as a magnet, not from neediness, but from alignment. When a man becomes complete within himself, when he no longer seeks external validation or emotional crutches, he steps into a fundamentally different neurobiological state. This isn't about isolation or detachment from others. It's about internal coherence. The brain's default mode network stabilizes, anxiety diminishes, and the reward system recalibrates toward intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic dependency. What this means is that the man who lives alone without a girl, friend by choice, isn't lacking. He isn't incomplete. He's whole, and that wholeness radiates. From a neuroscience perspective, people are exquisitely sensitive to energy states. They pick up on nervous system cues, calm versus reactive, secure versus anxious, aligned versus fragmented. The whole man emits a stability that others unconsciously sense. It's not a performance, it's a baseline. And that baseline attracts differently. Instead of chasing relationships out of desperation or fear, he attracts connections that resonate on a deeper level, because he's not projecting need but presence. This creates a feedback loop where relationships aren't about filling gaps, but about mutual enhancement. Partners are drawn not because he's incomplete, but because he's an equal participant in a dynamic of growth. The irony is that many who chase relationships out of lack end up perpetuating cycles of instability because the nervous system stays reactive, the dopamine system stays dysregulated, and connection becomes impossible. But the man who has built himself through solitude, discipline, and neurochemical recalibration is prepared. He can engage with others from a place of strength, not scarcity, and that changes everything not just for him, but for anyone who crosses his path.